I'm the reason a man is alive, and for 3 years, almost no one at his wedding knew that, until his new father-in-law decided to remind me, in front of 200 people, exactly where he thought I belonged. Richard Whitfield, the bride's father, a real estate developer with a laugh like a door slamming, looked at my dress blues, looked at the seating chart in his hand, and looked back at me like I'd wandered in off the street. "You're not family," he said, loud enough for the nearest 4 tables to hear. "Sit in the back." He pointed, actually pointed, one finger, like he was directing traffic, toward an empty table near the kitchen doors, half set, no flowers, no place cards. I remember thinking, distantly, that I had stood in worse places than that. I had knelt in a dirt ditch outside Kandahar with my hands inside another human being, so a folding chair by the kitchen wasn't going to be the thing that broke me. But it stung anyway. It always does, even when you've trained yourself not to let it show on your face. To understand how a groom stopping his own wedding reception to ask an entire room to stand for a stranger in uniform came to feel, in that moment, like the most natural thing in the world, you have to go back 3 years, to a stretch of road outside a forward operating base, and to a version of me that didn't yet know how this story would end. I'm Staff Sergeant Maya Reyes, U.S. Army combat medic, and my job for 6 years was simple in description and impossible in practice: keep people alive long enough for someone with a real hospital to take over. Daniel Foster, the groom, was a 24-year-old specialist with a laugh too big for his own body and a habit of humming when he was nervous, which was most of the time. He was 3 weeks from rotating home when the vehicle in front of his took the brunt of an IED, and he took the shrapnel meant for the guy behind him. I got to him in under 2 minutes. I remember his hand finding my wrist and gripping it so hard I had bruises the next day, and I remember saying his name over and over, not because it did anything medically, but because it kept him tethered to the sound of another person's voice. He didn't remember much of that day afterward. He remembered my voice. He told me later that was the thing he held on to in the dark, not the pain, my voice, steady, saying his name like it was a fact and not a hope. We stayed in touch the way people from that kind of day do, sporadically, gratefully, a text on the anniversary, a photo of him at physical therapy standing on a leg the surgeons had told him he might lose. When he told me he was getting married, I cried in my car in a Target parking lot, which is not a thing I do. When he asked me to come, he said, "I want you there in uniform. I want people to see the reason I'm still breathing." I told him that was a lot of pressure to put on a dress uniform. He told me I'd earned every ounce of it. What Daniel didn't fully explain, what I don't think he fully understood himself, not yet, was the family he was marrying into. Richard Whitfield ran his household the way he ran his open houses, staged, controlled, everyone assigned a role and a place. His daughter Lauren, the bride, was lovely and a little overwhelmed, the kind of bride who'd clearly spent 18 months being told what her wedding would look like rather than being asked. And Richard had a very specific idea of who belonged at the head tables and who belonged near the kitchen, and that idea ran almost entirely on net worth and last name. A soldier in a rented hotel ballroom, with no +1, no title he recognized, and a haircut he assumed meant hired help, I didn't fit anywhere on his chart. So he made a spot for me. In the back. Near the doors. Where the room wouldn't have to look at me. I want to be fair to him, because fairness is a discipline I practice even when it costs me something. Richard wasn't a cartoon villain backstage twirling a mustache. He genuinely believed he was protecting his daughter's day from anything unpolished, anything he hadn't personally vetted and approved. He'd said as much to the wedding planner 2 days earlier, a comment my brother overheard and told me about with his jaw tight. "I don't need some rando in a costume making my daughter's photos look like a recruitment poster." My brother, Eli Reyes, my younger brother by 4 years and the person I'd asked to be my date for the night, had gone quiet and furious in that particular way he does, the way that means he's filing something away for later rather than saying it out loud. Eli works logistics for a shipping company, has never worn a uniform in his life, and has spent our entire adult relationship watching people underestimate me and hating it more than I ever let myself hate it. He squeezed my hand under the table when Richard walked away from us at the reception. "He has no idea," he muttered. I told him it didn't matter. I'd decided, somewhere over the last 3 years of quiet, hard-won competence, commendations I didn't frame, a Purple Heart I kept in a drawer, a promotion I found out about through an email instead of a ceremony because I was overseas, that I didn't need Richard Whitfield to understand who I was. I'd let the room find out on its own, if it ever needed to. So I sat at the empty table by the kitchen, in my dress blues, ribbons catching the light every time the door swung open, and I watched a wedding happen 50 feet away from a family that had decided I wasn't part of the story. There's a specific kind of patience you learn in triage, the discipline of not reacting to the loudest thing in the room, of trusting that the truth of a situation will surface in its own time if you don't force it. I didn't storm over to Richard. I didn't correct him. I didn't even tell Daniel what had happened, not yet, because I didn't want to hand him a fight on his own wedding night. I just sat, and ate the slightly cold chicken they'd rushed to my table, and watched Eli simmer beside me, and let the evening move toward whatever it was going to become. Somewhere in the back of my mind, though, I registered it the way I register vitals on instinct now, without even trying, logged it, filed it, a small, precise entry in a ledger I don't keep on purpose but can't stop keeping anyway. Noted. Not forgotten. Not yet relevant. The toast started around 9. Lauren's maid of honor cried through hers in the good way. The best man told a story about Daniel's humming that made half the room laugh and made me go very still, because I knew exactly where that habit came from and exactly what silence it used to fill. And then Daniel stood up, tapped his glass, and instead of thanking the caterers or making a joke about married life, he said he wanted to tell everyone a story first. He said it was the only story that mattered to him that night, more than the vows, more than the ring. He told the room about a road outside a base whose name most of them had never heard. He told them about the sound the vehicle made. He told them, in a voice that had gone rough and slow, about a medic who talked to him the entire time she worked, who said his name so many times it became the only thing he could hold on to, who got him stable enough to survive the flight home. He said he used to think he'd never get to properly thank her, that some debts are too big for a card or a handshake. And then he looked past the head table, past his own father-in-law, straight toward the back of the room, toward the table by the kitchen doors that had been set for someone the family didn't think mattered. "She's here tonight," he said. "In uniform. Because I asked her to be, so that everyone in this room would know exactly what a hero looks like when she's not being one on purpose." The room turned. 200 faces, moving in that slow, rippling way a crowd moves when it's trying to locate something it didn't know to look for. I felt Eli's hand find mine again under the table, gripping it the way I remember Daniel gripping my wrist 3 years ago, not for comfort exactly, more like proof that this was actually happening. Richard Whitfield's face did something I will remember for a very long time, the practiced, hosting a party smile cracking sideways into confusion, then into something closer to dread, as 30 different guests who'd watched him wave me to the back began putting the pieces together in real time. "Staff Sergeant Maya Reyes," Daniel said, and his voice caught, just slightly, on the rank. "She's the reason I'm alive to marry your daughter tonight, Richard." He didn't say it as an accusation. He didn't need to. The silence that followed did all the work an accusation would have done, and did it better. "Everyone," Daniel said, "please stand." And they did. All of them. Chairs scraping, 200 people rising to their feet in a hotel ballroom, and I sat there for one full second in my dress blues with my heart doing something it hadn't done since that road outside Kandahar, before Eli pulled me gently up by the elbow because I think I'd forgotten how. I want to tell you I felt triumphant. Mostly I felt exposed, the particular nakedness of being seen all at once after being invisible on purpose for hours. I looked for Richard without meaning to. He was standing too, he almost had to, the whole room was up, but he was standing the way a man stands when the floor has shifted under him and he hasn't caught his balance yet. His daughter, Lauren, had both hands over her mouth. Somebody near the front started clapping, and then it moved through the room the way applause does when it's not polite applause but something closer to relief, like the room itself had needed permission to acknowledge what had actually been sitting quietly by the kitchen doors all night. Richard found his way to me afterward, during the part of the reception where the DJ takes over and people start pretending the emotional part is over. He didn't apologize right away. He said, "I didn't know," in the voice of a man more embarrassed than sorry, still working out how to arrange his face. I told him, evenly, that he hadn't asked. That was the whole of it, really, not that he'd been cruel exactly, but that he hadn't thought I was worth a single question before deciding where I belonged. "You looked at a haircut and a seating chart," I said, "and decided I was staff. I've been decided about by better men than you, Mr. Whitfield, on worse days than this one. I'll survive it." I wasn't performing forgiveness. I wasn't performing anger either. I was just telling him the truth, plainly, the way I'd tell a patient their prognosis, because dressing it up wouldn't have helped either of us. The wedding planner told me later that Richard spent the rest of the night unusually quiet for a man who normally narrated his own party. Eli, who does not let things go the way I do, made sure at least 3 separate relatives got the full story of the empty table and the pointed finger before the night was over, not out of spite exactly, more out of the same stubborn loyalty that's kept him in my corner since we were kids. I didn't ask him to. I didn't stop him either. What happened in the weeks after mattered more to me than the applause did, honestly. Daniel and Lauren sent me a letter, an actual letter, not a text, a few days into their honeymoon, and in it Lauren wrote that she'd had no idea her father had done what he'd done until Daniel told her on the drive to the airport, and that she was furious on my behalf in a way she hadn't expected to be, given we'd only just met. She wrote that she wanted a relationship with me going forward that had nothing to do with her father's version of who deserved a seat at the table. That mattered more to me than Richard's stammered almost apology ever could have, because it was chosen, not extracted. Richard reached out himself, eventually, about a month later. A text, careful and overly formal, the kind of message a man writes and rewrites before sending. He said he'd been thinking about that night. He said he hoped I'd let him make it right, dinner, maybe, a proper introduction to the rest of the family, a chance to start over. I read it twice, standing in my kitchen with Eli's dog underfoot, and I felt something I want to describe honestly, not vengeance, not warmth either. Just distance. Calm, settled distance, the kind you earn once you've stopped needing someone's approval to know your own worth. I wrote back 3 lines. I told him I appreciated the message, that I held no interest in dinner or introductions, and that I wished his family well from exactly the distance he'd chosen for me at the back of that ballroom. I didn't say it to wound him. I said it because it was true, and because for the first time in a long time, telling the truth and protecting my own peace were finally the same sentence. I still see Daniel and Lauren. Not often, life is what it is, but enough. Daniel calls me on the anniversary of that road, every year, just to say he's still humming, still breathing, still here. Last month he told me his physical therapist cleared him for a half marathon, and I sat in my car afterward and cried in a parking lot for the second time because of that man, which I've decided is allowed. Eli still brings up the seating chart sometimes, usually when he wants to make me laugh, doing an impression of Richard's pointed finger that gets more exaggerated every time he tells it. I let him have that one. He earned it too, sitting beside me at that back table, filing away his own quiet ledger of everything he wasn't going to let me forget I deserved better than. I think about what Richard saw when he looked at me that night before he knew anything, a woman in a uniform he didn't recognize, at a table he'd decided didn't need flowers. And I think about what the room saw an hour later, once the truth had been read out loud in the only language that ever really convinces people, not a title, not a lecture, just a man standing up and telling 200 people the exact debt he owed and exactly who he owed it to. People will place you wherever's convenient for them, right up until the moment they're forced to reckon with what you actually are. I've stopped waiting for permission to be seen. I just keep doing the work, keep showing up, and let the truth take its own sweet time walking to the front of the room. If this story hit you somewhere real, hit subscribe and stick around. I've got a lot more of these, and I'd love for you to be here for the next one.